I think they took the whole bad plan, better than no plan at all thing a little too far with this one. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 11th movie in the DCEU, DC's 2022 superhero action film, Black Adam. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Black Adam stars Dwayne Johnson, Aldis Hodge, and Borsnan, and was directed by Jaume Collet-Serra. It tells the story of superpowered Teth Adam, who after thousands of years is released upon the modern world to exact his own form of justice. It always feels like such a gamble going to see a new DCEU movie. They're either really good or really disappointing, and it's hard to tell which it's going to be until you're sitting there in the theater. I'll admit that this was a movie I initially didn't have much interest in. I've talked about it in past videos, but I have a hard time getting excited for a comic book movie where I don't already sorta know the character. Before Shazam came out, I had no clue who Black Adam was. And even going into this movie, basically all I knew was that this was a character who's usually a Shazam antagonist. That said, I did enjoy Shazam, so a darker spin-off was an intriguing prospect. And the Hall H presentation at Comic-Con this summer was certainly a hyping experience, so I was kind of looking forward to this one. Remember how I said you never quite know what you're gonna get with a DCEU movie? Well, this is not one of the good ones. In spite of its attempts, or maybe more accurately, intentions, to be something different, this is one of the more generic comic book movies we've had in a while. Now, I'm not sure how this movie plays for existing fans of the character, but for somebody new like me, this film does very little to capture your interest or make you care. It gets off to a very slow start with an extended exposition backstory, and then follows that up with an artifact hunting expedition that plays out exactly how you expect it to. In fact, that's something you could say about nearly everything in this film. It's a very predictable movie that follows the same expected story beats and not so twisty reveals that you've seen in countless other comic book movies over the last 2 decades. For some, that kind of familiarity might be a draw, but for me, it just made the story dull. That dullness was kind of a weird quality for the film, because a lot of stuff happens. It's busy with a bunch of different plots and subplots, multiple sets of characters, and 2 different time periods. But it comes across as overstuffed, making it hard to know what we should really be focusing on. Is it a Black Adam movie? A Justice Society movie? A film about freedom and liberation? A movie about power and morality? Is Teth Adam a villain? A hero? An anti-hero? At times, it feels like this movie wants to be all of these different things, but by spreading itself so thin across all of these different ideas, it never really succeeds with any of them, and likewise, never sets itself apart from other films that have previously explored and done all of these same things. As is often the case within the DCEU, Black Adam is a fairly self-serious film. It does have moments of comedy, and a few characters who are bizarrely used as purely comedic relief, but there was something off about most of the humor in the film. Even apart from the jokes themselves, there was this flat quality to it that I think stemmed from the editing. There was just something off about the comedic timing, so even some of the better jokes didn't have a chance to land. The editing was also a big factor in the action sequences. Now, there were some enjoyable moments, but the frenetic movement and cutting took away from a lot of it. And while we're on the topic of editing, I would be remiss not to mention the abundance of slow motion and speed ramping. It gets a bit excessive, and some of the people in my theater were actually laughing at some of these sequences by the end. Stylistically, this feels much more like a Zack Snyder film than a Jaume Collet-Serra movie, which could be a good or bad thing depending on who you are. So the story and structure and action are hit or miss, but what about the characters? Well, all of the just standard human characters are pretty average. You've seen versions of these same characters, and even their role in this story, in a bunch of other movies. As seems to be the bane of countless comic book movies, the villain is extremely underwhelming, and honestly kind of feels unnecessary for the story. So that just leaves us with our heroes. Or heroes and anti-hero? Maybe? The Justice Society is okay, but I really don't understand their inclusion in this film. Like, I get it from a plot device storytelling perspective. They're there to highlight the moral contrast and drive Teth Adams' character arc, but they just seem like such a random set of characters to send in for that purpose, which makes their inclusion feel more like setup for future movies than anything else. Of the 4 JSA members, 2 have almost nothing to do in this film. 1 is frustratingly and repetitively one-dimensional, and 1 is actually pretty good. But what about our main character, Black Adam? I alluded to it before, but it felt like this movie never quite knew what it wanted to do with this character. At times, it seemed like it really wanted to take a darker villain/anti-hero approach, but never fully commits to it, which leaves the character in kind of a generic morality limbo. Now, I've got to admit that I tend to enjoy Dwayne Johnson's performances. He is a very charismatic actor, and I always have fun with his movies. So having him finally play a superhero just seemed like it would be a ton of fun. But that inherent charisma and charm that he usually has is almost nowhere to be found here. It's clearly an intentional choice, and the product of the serious tone and character's rage, but it comes across as pretty flat for most of the movie, and not at all indicative of how much of a passion project this film was for Johnson. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Really, the only pro here for me was Dr. Fate. I've heard the name of this character before, but knew nothing about him going in. But I thought he was easily the most interesting and entertaining of the heroes. Aspects of his character were a little goofy at times, but he seems like one of those comic book characters that would be hard to translate to film in a non-goofy way, so it's kind of understandable from that perspective. But he had a lot of pretty good lines, and Pierce Brosnan did a nice job, with at least his charm and charisma shining through for the character. On the con side, the biggest issue was the screenplay. This movie had some decent ideas, and I guess some themes that are probably worth exploring, even though we've seen them in other superhero movies before, but everything was just put together in an extraordinarily clunky and generic way. The structure was pretty messy, splitting the focus between far too many storylines, while also telegraphing the big twists and reveals almost immediately. The villain was weak, the characterization of almost every character was underwhelming, the story was overstuffed. It just had a lot of problems that all seemed to stem from the writing. Con number 2 is how flat this movie feels. This is probably largely a consequence of the first con, but this is just a very dull, generic film, pretty much across the board. The story, the visuals and color grading, the characters, it's weird, but it's like this film has no identity. This is even stranger considering this was not only Dwayne Johnson's passion project for over a decade now, but also because he stars in this movie. He's usually one of the more charismatic and fun actors to watch. His movies aren't always the greatest things, but he's at least always enjoyable in his movies. But that's not really the case here. It's intentional and keeping with the general tone of the film and character, but it just doesn't really work, and only further adds to how flat this film feels. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Black Adam or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Black Adam 2.5 out of 5 paws. It's a serviceable comic book movie, but a surprisingly generic one. It's certainly got its moments, but it's a fairly clunky, poorly constructed film that's largely devoid of charm, opting instead for a self-serious route to tell a story you'll swear you've already seen many times before. I would recommend Black Adam to fans of serious-toned 2000s superhero movies. That might sound kind of weirdly specific, but this film definitely has that kind of vibe. That more serious than it should be kind of tone, despite some ridiculous and goofy superhero antics, not to mention story construction and characterization on par for that era. I think people who already know at least something about the character of Black Adam, or any of these Justice Society characters, will probably get more enjoyment out of this movie than others, but that's a little hard to say. And if you're a big fan of what Zack Snyder has done with the DCEU, then I think you'll probably enjoy at least the action sequences in this movie. If you liked Black Adam, I would recommend Shazam. So, Black Adam was originally supposed to appear in Shazam, but during production, it was decided that he would get his own standalone spin-off movie. So, if you're interested in this aspect of the DCEU, with the Council of Wizards and these overly superpowered people who become powerful by saying a name, then you'll probably want to check out Shazam. Just know that the tone is very, very different, but I think much more enjoyable. If you're interested in another DCEU movie for its action and darker qualities, then you might want to check out The Suicide Squad. Not just Suicide Squad, but The Suicide Squad, for some brutal, bloody action. And if you're looking for some more desert fun with a 2000s vibe, you should watch The Mummy Returns. Not only are there some visual similarities at times, but both films feature Dwayne Johnson as a cursed character returning to life after thousands of years. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Black Adam? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, who's an actor that you think should finally play a superhero? And which hero should they play? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe if you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.